Before we begin, I'd just like to mention that while I will try to cover most of the important rules of the game, this will not be a fully comprehensive tutorial but is rather meant to introduce the most important aspects for you to be able to start a game as soon as possible. The following tutorial only includes the base game of Age of Wonders Planetfall. Age of Wonders Planetfall is a 4X turn-based grand strategy game set in a science fiction universe. It was developed by Triumph Studios and published by Paradox Interactive. In Age of Wonders Planetfall, you will play as the commander of a faction colonizing a newly discovered planet. The game is played in a series of turns where the goal is to be the first among several commanders to achieve one of several victory conditions. Each turn, you can perform several actions to help you achieve your chosen victory condition. You will take control of sectors to expand your control and income, research various technologies to acquire better tools, manage your relationships with other commanders and factions, and fight your way through anyone getting in the way of your victory. You can find the victory conditions in the Objectives tab here on the upper left side of the screen. Here, you'll also find the objectives you can accomplish that will help you achieve each victory condition. While helpful, these objectives are not mandatory and simply act as a guide, giving you rewards for achieving them that will help towards certain victories. The Unifier victory is what you can aim for with a diplomatic playstyle. It will require you to have a good reputation across the planet and will require a lot of influence to accomplish. The Last Man Standing victory requires you to annihilate all other commanders in the game. The Domination victory requires you to have control over a specific number of sectors in the planet. The Doomsday victory requires you to research, build, and launch a Doomsday device which will require a lot of resources. And the Score victory will be awarded to the player with the highest score after a set number of turns if none of the other victory conditions are met. Your score is determined by how well you did in the game. You can click on each victory condition to see the steps required to accomplish them. And take note that alliances can be made with other commanders, in which case, you'll work together as a team to achieve one of the victory conditions. Before we get into the actions you can do during the game, we need to explain resources first. Everything you do in the game will require a type of resource, and there are several types. You can view your current resources and income here, and colony-specific resources and income by clicking on a colony. And you can hover your cursor over each resource to see where the income is coming from, and to see deductions if there are any. Food increases and maintains a colony's population. Energy is the game's main currency and used to initiate many actions and maintain units. Production is responsible for the building of structures and producing units. Cosmite is a special resource that is used for more advanced buildings and units. A random event occurs every several turns, and happiness determines whether this event will be positive or negative. Knowledge is used during research to unlock different things like improved functions, new actions, and new and improved units. Influence is important in diplomatic actions when interacting with other factions. Take note that food production and happiness are colony-specific resources, while energy, cosmite, and knowledge are pulled together for faction-wide uses. At the start of every turn of the game, you'll be provided with notifications on the lower right side of the screen of relevant events that has happened somewhere in the planet, and available actions. This portion will also guide you through turns to make sure you don't miss out on available actions. If you find yourself wanting to end a turn with actions still available, you can click on this button to end the turn immediately. Research is an important part of the game, as not only do they provide you with better units and equipment so you can do better in combat, but they also unlock new functions and actions for your faction. As an example, at the start of the game, water sectors are inaccessible to us. To access the research screens, you can click on one of these two buttons on the upper left side of the screen. To be able to move through and build on water sectors, the aquatic development technology needs to be researched first. I won't be going over all of the available research as there's quite a lot, but you can always hover your cursor over each one to see what they provide. The game has two research trees, both of which become available at the start of the second turn. Military research unlock new units, weapons, mods, and operations. We will explain all these in depth in later chapters when they become relevant, but these technologies are mostly useful during combat situations. Society research deals with upgrading your colonies, increasing resource incomes, and gathering information. Knowledge is the resource needed for research, and you'll find your current knowledge income on the top left side of the screen. Your knowledge income will determine how long a research will take, as each research has a knowledge cost. For example, heavy laser applications cost 100 knowledge as you can see here. With our current income of 25 knowledge, it will take us 4 turns to complete this research. You won't need to compute how long each research will take as they are automatically computed for us, and you find those numbers indicated on the bottom right side of each research. Take note that your knowledge income applies for both society and military research, and is not shared or divided. This means that researching something in one category will not slow down the research for another. So, it's advisable to research something from both at the same time. Also, I'd like to note that if you're undecided on what you'd like to research, it's okay to go through one turn with no research as a single turn's worth of knowledge can be stored. To give an example, we aren't researching anything at the moment and currently have an income of 30 knowledge. Ending the turn, we'll see that the same amount will be stored for us to use this turn in both society and military research. But ending the turn once again, the number isn't doubled and stays the same, so it would be good for us to start researching something so our knowledge income doesn't go to waste. Each research tree is divided into several rows of categories. For example, in military research, this row specializes in improving your faction's firearms. Research also has levels presented as columns as you can see here. You'll also see lines connecting some lower level research to higher ones. This indicates that before gaining access to higher level research, you'll need to unlock connected lower leveled ones first. For example, let's say we want the level 2 research electromagnetic utilization. As we can see, there are 2 level 1 technologies connected to it, so we have some options. Let's go with heavy laser applications. Fast forwarding several turns, we can see that we now have access to both photon acceleration and electromagnetic utilization, both of which are connected to heavy laser applications. Before we move on, I'd like to mention that when you reach level 11 in both military and society research, instead of being provided specific options, once researched, you'll instead receive a random secret technology, and you can restart this research over and over to gain access to more secret technologies. Secret technologies are like any other research, but can be significantly more powerful. You start the game with one colonized sector. Colonies are structures that produce units and resources and represent your control over the area. The map of the game is divided into sectors by lines, and sectors can have colors that represent ownership. In this case, Mallerville showing up as orange indicates that it is ours. Clicking on a colony will provide you with a summary of the colony's income. On the left side of the screen, you'll find several tabs that will provide actions you can do with the colony and several other information. The first tab shows the units you can produce in this colony. The second tab shows the structures available for construction. The third tab helps with managing sectors annexed by the colony. The fourth is for managing colonists occupying the colony, and the fifth tab provides a summary of the colony. Any action you take in a colony will put it on queue on the right side of the panel. Only one task can progress at a time, and you can have a maximum of 6 in the queue. Underneath each task, you'll find the number of turns it will take to complete, but take note, only the first one on top will progress. You can cancel tasks in the queue by clicking on the X button when you hover your cursor over them, and you can change the sequence by clicking on the task's arrow button. When changing the order of the tasks, any progress made will be saved unless you cancel it. Producing units has a cost. While there is a summary of the cost on the right side of the unit, you can hover your cursor over each unit to see a more detailed description. In this case, producing a colonizer in this colony will cost us 50 energy, 10 cosmite, 1 population, and 250 production, which will take 3 turns to produce. Some units have other prerequisites, like in this case, we aren't able to produce a colonizer because it requires at least 4 colonists in the colony, and we currently only have 3. Units also have an upkeep cost. This is the price paid every turn to keep your units around and loyal to you. In this case, the colonizer's upkeep cost is 4 energy per turn. If you aren't able to pay for a unit's upkeep, they can leave your faction. You can find your current total upkeep cost by hovering your cursor over the energy resource on the top left side of the screen. Structures provide improvements to a colony, such as increased production, availability of new unit types, better defenses, and so on. Like units, constructing structures require a cost and may take several turns to accomplish. You can hover your cursor over each one to see what they will provide to your colony. Take note that some structures have conditions, so it's important to read their description. For instance, the central core reactor mentions that only one central structure can be built. This means by choosing to build this, the other central structures become unavailable. Another useful tool you'll find in colonies is the Colonist Management Panel. Colonists provide additional income depending on where they are assigned. You can move them around to better manage your income, and they have an upkeep of 2 food per colonist. As an example, here I have 3 colonists providing additional income for food, energy, and production. They are currently evenly spread out as the auto-assign function is currently on, but you can reallocate your colonists to increase or decrease the income of specific resources. For instance, if we wanted to prioritize food income, we can click this button to do so, and an arrow will appear to indicate the prioritization. If we wanted to deprioritize food income instead, we can do so by clicking on the same button a second time to reallocate colonists elsewhere. This time, the status is represented by a downward arrow, and you can click on the same button a third time to return to default. You can also manually allocate colonists by clicking on Auto. In this case, instead of choosing priorities, you can manually allocate colonists. Any change you make instantly takes effect, and you can track the changes in income on the summary screen to make sure the changes you made does not leave any of the resources at a negative income. Another thing you'll find in the tab is the amount of turns it will take for the colony to produce more colonists. And again, the speed of this process is dictated by the colony's food income. You'll also see here how many turns left until a population event occurs. These events are dictated by your colony's happiness. To reiterate, high amounts of happiness will result in positive events, and low amounts will result in negative ones. Once your colony has 4 colonists, you can annex an additional sector. And every succeeding number of colonists in multiples of 4 will provide additional sectors with the maximum of 4 sectors. So once the colony reaches 8 colonists, it can annex another sector. Take note that you can only annex sectors that are at most 2 sectors away from your colony. Once this action becomes available for a colony, this yellow icon will appear in adjacent sectors, giving you options on which sector you'd like to claim. By clicking on the icon, aside from annexing the sector, you'll be provided with other options you can do. Each option has their own requirements, prerequisites, and functions, and you can hover your cursor over each one to see a detailed description of each. When an option is missing or is grayed out, it means the option is unavailable due to certain conditions. In our current example, we are unable to annex Cliffside Vales because a different faction's army is currently occupying the sector. Another example, we are unable to annex Walker Shoreline because we haven't completed the research required to annex water sectors. Annexing a sector will create an extension that provides additional income to the colony. Before doing this, you can zoom out of the map and click on the Economy tab to see what resources are available in each sector represented by the small resource icons. Another thing to consider when annexing are the structures present in the sector, as these can provide more income to a colony. As always, you can hover your cursor over each one to see what bonuses they provide. Take note that when a structure has a red border, this means it is currently occupied by an army. Even if the sector has been annexed, occupied structures do not provide their bonuses to your colony until you can vacate the structure either through diplomacy or combat. Once you've annexed the sector, you can choose the resource it can specialize in. You do this by clicking on the colony and clicking the Sector Production tab. Here, you'll be provided the options available, and take note that each annexed sector can only specialize in one resource. One thing to consider when choosing the resource to exploit in an annexed sector is the amount of icons present. Each icon provides an additional level to the exploitation and thus more income. As an example, Dunmore Crags has 2 energy icons, 1 food icon, and 1 production. This results in a level 3 exploitation for energy and level 2 for food and production. And by hovering our cursor, we can see that a level 3 energy exploitation provides plus 20 energy income and 3 population slots for energy, versus the lesser values we'll get with the other resources. It is also important to check structures present in the sector, as they can provide additional bonuses depending on the specialization you choose for the sector. For example, Dunmore Crags has a derelict power plant that grants an additional 5 energy income if the sector it's in specializes in energy exploitation. In this case, with the higher level and the bonus from the structure, it will be very beneficial for us to exploit energy from the sector. A forward base allows you to claim a sector for your colony without taking advantage of its resources, at the cost of some influence. Forward bases allow you to control sectors to reserve them to be annexed or colonized later, or to act as defenses for your more valuable sectors. But take note that forward bases do not count towards the domination victory, which requires you to occupy a certain number of sectors. To start a new colony, you'll need a colonizer in an unoccupied space. And similar to annexing sectors, it will be beneficial to consider present structures, but the resource icons on the sector provide no benefits to colonies. And take note, you can't establish colonies next to each other. Take note as well that unoccupied sectors are considered claimed by the first faction to occupy a sector adjacent to it. As an example, in this scenario, Filled Forest is currently unoccupied, but the red faction was able to build in Desolation Zone before I was able to build in Overgrown Orchard, both of which are adjacent to Filled Forest. So when trying to annex the sector, we get this notification telling us that building on the claim sector will give the red faction Casus Belli as a penalty. We will tackle Casus Belli in a later chapter. But to provide some context, allowing other commanders to get Casus Belli against you can lead to some undesirable events. Another thing to consider when claiming sectors are hazards. The presence of a hazard gives penalties to the colony in possession of the affected sector. For instance, this sector has a geothermal instability hazard. If we were to annex this sector, our production and happiness income will be negatively affected. To remove hazards, we'll need to research environmental conditioning. At the start of the game, aside from your colony's area, most of the world will be obstructed by fog, requiring you to move your armies around to gain vision and see what lies underneath. You usually start the game with a couple of armies. Armies are a group of units that move and fight together. By clicking on an army, you'll find the units that compose the army. We'll explain units further in a later chapter, but for now, what you need to pay attention to are each of the unit's move points. An army's maximum movement will be determined by the unit with the least move points. The map of the game is presented in a hexagonal grid where each hex represents a single space. In terms of movement, each space costs several move points depending on the terrain type. You can hover your cursor over each hex to see its terrain type and the cost of moving into the space. To give an example, looking at our options, this space is a forest and would require 8 move points, while this space is barren, only requiring 6. Take note that one of the fastest ways of traversing the map is through your own roads that connect your sectors. And remember that hazards can also affect movement. You can command your army to move several spaces at a time. Hovering your cursor over far spaces will automatically map out the route that costs the least amount of move points. But take note of the blue lines. This represents the farthest your army can reach during the turn. You can click on farther spaces, but going farther will require several turns noted by the number on the circle. 1 means it will require 1 turn to reach this destination, and moving further, we'll see that this destination will require 2 turns. You can also split armies by clicking on an army and clicking on the movement icon of specific units, which you'd like to move on their own. Each space can only be occupied by a single army, and you can move through your own armies to save move points but not through other factions. To further help armies get around the map, there are teleport stations scattered around. These are structures, aside from providing bonuses to the faction that controls the sector it's in, will allow armies to teleport from one side of the map to another. One of the first things you will do in the game is to explore the planet with your armies to look for useful sectors, meet other factions, discover other points of interest such as loot and structures, and to look for hostile units to give your units some fighting experience. Loot is scattered all over the world and is presented as glowing boxes and crates. These provide bonuses such as resources, mods, weapons, and so on. Sometimes, once discovered, they will provide you with options on what you'd like to do with what you found. In this example, we found blueprints and materials to create 2 different guns. We are given the option to create one of those guns or just take the resources. I'll explain the significance of weapons later on. Sometimes you'll find loot guarded by an army. In this case, you'll need to either defeat them in battle or ask them to leave if you're already acquainted with the faction to gain access to the loot. Another thing you'll encounter when exploring are marauders, which are neutral hostile units. You cannot negotiate with them and they don't ally with anyone. They have armies that roam around fighting and destroying everything they encounter. They are the easiest way for your armies to gain some experience. But be careful, as they get stronger over time too, and can be a real nuisance if not dealt with. They come from spawner sites, which are scattered all over the map and can be destroyed to stop them from multiplying further. Before we explain how combat works, first we'll need to explain units and how you can go about customizing them to make them more powerful. Each unit in the game has their own individual characteristics. You'll find a summary of this by clicking on an army, and clicking on a unit you'd like to customize or know more about. Here, you'll find the unit's combat abilities and defensive capabilities, attach mods if any, and their morale and experience. We'll get to their abilities a bit later in combat. What I'd like to note here now are the mods. Mods are pieces of equipment you can either unlock through research or find all over the planet through exploration and looting. They provide additional abilities and characteristics when attached to units, and each unit has 3 mod slots. The number on the slots represent how many available mods we can attach to this unit. In this case, we have 4. By clicking on a mod slot, we'll be able to see these options, and as always, you can hover your cursor over each one to see a detailed description of each mod. Mods also have tier levels, which you'll be able to see here. A mod's tier level usually indicates its overall power level, meaning higher tier mods will provide better benefits. Before attaching mods, aside from choosing what we know our units will be able to take advantage of, we also need to consider the cost. Let's give an example to further explain this point. Here, we can see that nanite injectors is one of the mods we can attach to this unit. Nanite injectors cost 10 energy and 5 cosmite to attach. Attaching mods to units is one of the uses of cosmite, one of the resources mentioned earlier. And while we do have 90 of them at the moment, our cosmite income is only 5 per turn, which isn't a lot. While this mod grants an additional shield point and the ability to self-heal once per battle, Vanguard Troopers are some of our most basic units. They are easy to produce and don't have a lot of special abilities. So while keeping them alive is important, spending resources to do so might not be worth it. The Ammunition Fléchette mod, on the other hand, costs the same but instead increases the damage that our unit can deal to enemies, so we'll opt to attach this one. After choosing a mod, you'll be given the option to either attach the mod to this unit only, or to attach the mod to all equivalent units. If we choose the latter option, all of our Vanguard Troopers on the map will have the mod attached to them as well, which is why the cost seems higher. In this case, we have 2 Vanguard Troopers on the map, so the cost is doubled. Whichever option we choose, we'll be presented with a screen that will allow us to create a unit template. Creating templates allow you to produce units with specific mods already attached. Templates can help with conserving your energy resource, as you won't need to pay the energy cost to attach the mods anymore. After confirming this template, and going back to our colony, we can see that the Stinging Trooper is now available for production and has the same energy cost as a regular Vanguard Trooper, only costing additional cosmite for the mod. Take note that attaching mods to units do not happen instantaneously and may take several turns. This is another advantage of creating templates, as the units will be produced with the mods already attached. If a unit is in the process of attaching a mod, a wrench icon will be visible on the unit. Clicking on the unit will show us that the attachment will take 1 turn. This doesn't mean that the unit is completely incapacitated. They can still move in battle. However, as you can see here, the unit will suffer some penalties in combat until the attachment is complete. Another thing I'd like to point out about units is their morale. Keeping your unit's morale at a normal or higher level is important, as high morale increases the chance of critical hits during combat, while low morale increases the chance of misses during combat, and can cause your units to leave your faction as well. There are many things that can affect morale, so I won't be able to mention them all, but you can always hover your cursor over the morale icon to see what's affecting it. To give a few examples, having your army stand on hazardous sectors can negatively affect their morale, and some research can unlock functions to increase it. Units can also level up through various means, winning battles being the primary way, to increase their characteristics. You can check your unit's levels through the icons on the lower right side of their thumbnails. You can also click on a unit to view their current experience. In this case, we are 1 experience away from leveling up this unit, and you can hover over their rank to see what bonuses they will get once they level up. Heroes are very similar to units with 3 major differences. Aside from mods, you can change a hero's arsenal. They have a primary and secondary weapon slot, and like mods, Additional weapons can be acquired through research and exploration. 2. Unlike units, attachment of mods to heroes is instantaneous and don't require several turns to accomplish. And 3. When heroes level up, instead of receiving a fixed characteristic bonus, they will receive skill points which can be allocated to the skills of your choosing. You start the game with a hero designated as your commander, and you will gain a new hero every 10 turns. Once a new hero arrives, you'll be given the option to recruit them for a cost, reject them, or to request a new hero which will take an additional number of turns. Take note that units and heroes in the game are eliminated when they die in combat. There is one exception, which is your commander. In our case, in this scenario, our commander is Jack Gilder. If he is defeated in combat, he will return to our headquarters, which is the colony marked with the star symbol, usually the colony we started with, and will take several turns to recover before he can be deployed again. Armies can have a maximum of 6 units. And aside from everything we've discussed so far, another thing you can check is their current health, with the bars underneath each unit. This is important as you usually wouldn't want to start a fight if your units don't have full health. They heal over time, and there are structures scattered around the map that can heal them faster as well. Combat is one of the main aspects of Age of Wonders Planetfall. You utilize combat to gain control of sectors, structures, and even other factions. Combat can be initiated when 2 or more armies are at war and are adjacent to each other. You can check your diplomatic status with an army by hovering your cursor over them. To give an example, here, we can see that we are at war with these marauders, and we are at neutral with the Scyfish faction. Once combat is initiated, you will be given the option to automatically simulate the battle or to manually play through the combat yourself. What needs to be considered for these options are the attacking and defending power of each army, which you can see here. Take note that it is only advisable to choose the auto combat option if you have a huge advantage that can ensure victory and the survival of your units, as producing units can be costly both in time and resources. Preserving units is very important, especially in the earlier parts of the game where you don't have a lot yet, especially if your units have already gained some experience. But just to show you how this works, if we choose the auto combat option, we will be immediately presented with a result screen that will convey the victor and any surviving units. If we choose the manual combat option instead, we will be zoomed in on the location for a tactical battle. The location where the combat was initiated will determine what kind of terrain the battle will take place in. In this case, we were at a mountainous terrain, so that's what's represented in the tactical map. And like the world map, the tactical map is also presented in a hexagonal grid. It works the same way as well, with each hex representing a space that units can target, move into, or occupy. During combat, the goal of course is to eliminate all of the opposing units. To do this, you will activate your units, choosing actions for them to perform, with those actions costing action points. Your units' action points are represented by the dotted line underneath their health bars. Each unit will have 3 action points to spend per turn, and you can freely spend action points from units one by one and going back to them later if they still have some left. By clicking on a unit, you'll see actions that are available to them, and how many action points these actions will cost. The first type of action I'd like to discuss is movement. When you click on a unit, you'll find several hexes highlighted by different colors. The colors represent how many action points will be spent if you moved the unit into those hexes. Green hexes cost 0 action points, blue hexes cost 1, purple hexes cost 2, and red hexes cost 3. There are several factors you need to consider when moving your units. The most important one is, of course, positioning. Attack actions require certain ranges and can be affected by obstacles. You'd want to place your units on spaces where they have a clear and unobstructed line of sight to your targets for higher chances of dealing damage. This is indicated by the colored lines appearing around enemy units' icons. Green indicates a high chance of hitting the unit from the target space. Yellow indicates medium chance, red means low chance, and no lines mean the unit will be untargetable from that space. Another thing to consider is your unit's safety. Obstacles provide cover for units, which in turn decreases the chance of them getting hit by your opponents. This is represented by a shield icon when choosing a space to move into. A half shield is a half cover that decreases the chances of getting hit from that specific direction. And a full shield is a full cover that obstructs line of sight and can prevent attacks coming from that direction. There are also some environmental factors to consider. Sometimes you'll see spaces affected by environmental factors due to attacks, events, or simply by default, that can hurt units that move into those spaces. And there can also be obstacles that, if damaged, can explode and hurt units close to it. Another thing to consider are spaces affected by enemy overwatch, but we'll cover that in a second. Aside from moving, you can also perform units' active abilities. These are usually their attack abilities, but it can also be others such as healing, special movements, and others. You can always hover your cursor over each one to read what they are. In their descriptions, you'll also find their maximum damage, damage channel, and maximum range of the attack. Damage channels determine the type of damage the attack will deal. This is represented by the elemental icons on certain actions. For instance, our purifiers will deal thermal damage, and our troopers will deal kinetic damage. This is where resistances and weaknesses become relevant as well. When in combat, or even before going into combat, it's important to know what resistances, weaknesses, and damage channels your units and opposing units have. Resistances can decrease the amount of damage and the chances of applying a negative status on units of specific damage channels, and weaknesses increase those damages and chances. To continue with our current scenario, we mostly deal kinetic and thermal damage, and our opponents mostly have arc resistance, so we're good in that regard. On the other hand, our opponents have kinetic, biochemical, and psionic attacks. We don't have a lot of resistances, aside from these units which are resistant to psionic attacks, so that's good too. We can see that these units also have arc weaknesses, but we already know our opponents don't have any attacks with that damage channel. So overall, we have a slight advantage over our opponents in this combat. Take note that there are several types of action costs as well, most of them ending a unit's activation. To give some examples, launch Plasma Bomb is a single action. This means it only costs one action point, but does end your unit's turn. This means it's advisable to move them first before using this action to maximize their action points. Another example, Plasma Repeater, is a repeating action, meaning when activated, it will be performed multiple times, using up every remaining action point the unit has. Aside from their cost, attacks can also have different targeting. For instance, the Wide Field Laser Array targets several hexes in a pattern. As mentioned earlier, attacks have range requirements, and certain factors can affect its chance to hit. When choosing a target for an attack, hovering your cursor over opponents will provide a helpful guide. You'll see its chance to hit, the maximum amount of damage you can make to the opposing unit's health, and any status effects the attack can apply to the target, as well as the chance of applying it. Once you trigger an attack, it can have several results. Hits deal full damage. Grazes deal half damage. And misses obviously deal no damage. Some attacks can also apply a status that can have a negative effect on units. The status that will be applied depends on the attack's damage channel. In our current example, our thermal damage applied a burning status on this unit that will last 3 turns, which means, as long as this status is active, this unit will receive 5 thermal damage per turn and will be easier to hit. Aside from resistances, armor and shield values also decrease the amount of damage a unit will take from a hit. There are, however, some exceptions. Psionic attacks ignore armor, and melee attacks ignore shields. Some abilities are reactions. A good example of this is Overwatch. Overwatch will have your units guard certain hexes where if an opposing unit moves into those spaces, they will be attacked. While this is usually an active ability for ranged units, melee units have this as a passive ability. Going back to movement, when moving into spaces that are guarded by an Overwatch ability, whether melee or ranged, you will be warned by an icon on the space, and opting to still move through those spaces will have your units attacked. If you find yourself in an unwinnable combat situation, you can either retreat or surrender. Retreating will allow you to save your units that have survived so far by moving them towards the edges of the map on the spaces with the arrows. However, you can only retreat if you are the attacker, meaning you initiated the fight. Defenders don't have this option. Surrendering, on the other hand, will immediately kill all your units, ending the fight immediately. The last thing we need to explain for combat are tactical operations. These are actions that can be performed during combat that can help out your units. They cost tactical operation points and energy to launch. In our current example, we have 2 tactical operation points to spend and 2 tactical operations to choose from. These points and options can be increased through research. And as always, you can hover your cursor over them to see what they provide. Take note that some of these operations aren't instantaneous and will take several turns to launch. I'd like to note that these operations cost a lot of energy, so be sure to only use them when needed, as you'll most likely get into a lot of combat situations, and using a tactical operation every time can easily deplete your energy reserves. Take note that tactical operation points only replenish at the start of a turn, so if you're looking to have a lot of combat in a single turn, it's recommended to save them when you really need them. When choosing auto combat, make sure to check or uncheck the box here so you can either save energy if a tactical operation isn't necessary for a victory, or utilize them to ensure a victory. Multiple armies can participate in a single battle. You can do this by having each army in a space adjacent to the defending army. And take note that this works both when attacking and defending. In this case, the power of involved allied armies will be combined for the combat. Strategic operations and doctrines work the same way as tactical operations, only they apply outside of combat. These are active and passive abilities that can help you in a lot of various ways. You can find the maximum number of strategic operations and doctrines you can activate here on the upper right side of the screen. Clicking on the icons will bring up your options for both, and you can hover your cursor over each one to see what benefits they will provide and their cost. Let's give an example. Let's say we want to activate the Builder Doctrine. As we can see, it has a cost of 6 strategic operation points. We have 2 in reserve and get 2 per turn, so it will take 2 turns to complete this doctrine. Take note that some of these operations are active abilities. This means that once completed, you will still need to launch it for it to take effect. For example, let's deploy the Native Threat Locator. This strategic operation will allow us to choose a colony, and it will reveal the closest hostile spawner. As we can see, it will only take 1 turn to complete. So, after ending the turn, we get a notification that it is now ready, and to launch, we'll need to select a colony. To increase your strategic operation points, doctrine limit, and the options for both, you'll need to complete specific research. For instance, Operation Effectiveness 1 will provide us a second doctrine slot. Another huge aspect of the game is diplomacy. In the game, you'll meet commanders of other factions who are also aiming for one of the victory conditions mentioned earlier. And throughout the game, you'll manage your relationship with these factions to help you with your long and short-term plans. You can find your current relationship status with factions you've met here in the diplomacy screen. Your relationship with each faction will dictate the type of interactions you can have with each other, with some options getting unlocked only in specific pacts. For instance, if you have a non-aggression pact with another commander, you won't be able to attack their armies. In this screen, you'll find other ways to interact with other commanders. Negotiations will allow you to change the terms of your relationship with other factions. In this screen, you can also trade with them, whether resources, sectors, or equipment. Pronouncements are messages you can send other commanders at the cost of some influence. This is the easiest way to manipulate a commander's opinion of you, depending on your goal for the faction. You can check a commander's trait to gauge what kind of interactions they will like and dislike. And take note that the commander's traits are hidden when you first meet them and will be revealed as you interact with them more and more. One of the diplomatic actions you can do is to declare war against another commander. On any other status, you won't be able to attack other commanders' armies or sectors. However, declaring a war can be punishing to your economy and will require some prerequisites to be viable. For a war to be viable, you'll need 2 things: popular support and casus belli. Popular support represents your population's agreement with going to war. You can check your current popular support by hovering over this icon on the main screen. Having high popular support for a war will result in bonuses, such as decreased upkeep and increased morale for units. And having low popular support will result in the complete opposite. And to reiterate, your armies having low morale will affect their hit chances in combat and may result to them leaving your faction. In order to garner popular support for a war, you'll need casus belli. Casus belli represents your reasons for going to war. Declaring a war on a commander while having a lot of casus belli against them will result in a positive popular support, and declaring a war without it will result in a negative popular support. You gain casus belli every time a commander does something negative to you, such as insulting you, trespassing in your sectors, and so on. You can also fabricate casus belli through some strategic operations that can be unlocked through research. Take note that some doctrines can also increase popular support if you want to declare a war, but don't have enough casus belli. As mentioned earlier, alliances can be made with other commanders, in which case, you will work together as a team to achieve a victory condition. There are two ways to create an alliance. One, if you progress a relationship enough, the top diplomatic state the two commanders can have is an alliance. In this case, both commanders benefit equally. The other option is a vassalage. In this case, one commander becomes the overlord and the other becomes a vassal. And in this case, the overlord has more power, takes a percentage of the vassal's income, and can force the vassal to join wars. This option is usually a last resort when one commander is desperately losing a war. Instead of letting the opposing commander take everything, they can pledge allegiance instead and become a vassal. But like any other diplomatic action, the chances of a vassalage to be accepted depends on a lot of factors. Aside from other commanders, another type of faction you'll meet are NPC factions. These are native colonies who aren't aiming for a victory condition, but still act like other factions, claiming sectors and having armies that move around. Like commanders, you can have a relationship with NPC factions. One of the benefits of having a relationship with NPC factions is that you can trade with them. By clicking on their dwellings, depending on your current relationship status, you can purchase units, equipment, doctrines, and even sectors. NPC factions also provide quests for you to do to positively progress the relationship, and provide you with rewards such as resources, units, and equipment. But take note that some NPC factions won't like it if you do quests for other NPC factions they don't like. Instead of developing a relationship with an NPC faction, you can instead go to war with them to annihilate them and take their claimed sectors. Unlike warring with commanders, going to war with NPC factions don't have the same complexities. Popular support isn't relevant and you don't need casus belli to declare the war. At the start of the game, you'll be given the option to choose your faction and commander. Different commanders will provide different starting bonuses, different long-term bonuses, and some faction-specific research and units. I won't be going over them as there's quite a lot, so I'll leave these for you to discover on your own. As mentioned earlier, if none of the other victory conditions are met after a set number of turns, the winner will be decided via scores. Your score is determined by your overall standing against other commanders in all aspects. If you find yourself in a situation where it seems like the game winner will be determined by score, being able to see commander scores will be of great help. To do this, you'll need to research area surveillance, which unlocks capability rankings. This allows you to view your current ranking by clicking on this button on the objective screen. And for you to be able to see more details on other commander's score, you'll need to research intelligence gathering, which unlocks the Infiltrate Operations Center strategic operation. As mentioned earlier, this isn't a fully comprehensive tutorial. So, when finding yourself with a question, a good tool to utilize is the in-game archives, which can be accessed through this button on the top right, where you can search for any information and get detailed descriptions and explanations. Regardless, the information provided should be enough for you to be able to start a game knowing what you can do, what you'd like to do, and how you will go about doing those things. Thanks for watching.